If you could get your child started on an activity that improves their physical and emotional development, teaches responsibility and discipline, improves academic performance, and they ask you to get involved with doing that activity, would you sign them up? Today, we're going to learn about the benefits of classical guitar lessons and how this Spanish tradition will do exactly that. But first, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Troy Serson. It rhymes with person. I've been teaching guitar for over a decade to students as young as 3, and I'm here to share the secrets my students have been using to be successful with the guitar, in the hopes that it inspires you or your child to take the next steps on your musical journey. Now, with that out of the way, let me ask you a question. Have you ever been to a concert and wondered, how do they remember all that? I started playing music before I went to my first concert, so this question never crossed my mind. And for most of my life, I've been one of those people who retains random facts about all sorts of different subjects, to the point where my sister used to call me Troycopedia. So I also didn't think anything of it. I just thought everyone's brains remembered things like this. One day in my 20s, I was playing guitar around the house, no written music anywhere in sight, and my roommate asked, how do you remember all of that? Great question. I didn't have an answer, but the same question is something Dr. Nina Kraus, a researcher from Northwestern University, asked, but she does have an answer. Her team set out to find out, is this a chicken or the egg situation, where people who naturally excel in memory pick up music, or does picking up music cause improvements in memory? And let me just say, the actual research is fascinating to read. By running studies on the brains of musicians and non-musicians over the past decade, they've been able to consistently prove that musicians remember, retain, and process information faster than non-musicians, particularly in distracting environments. My 2 cents is that pattern recognition plays a huge role in memorizing large amounts of music, and while I don't have an academic study to reference to prove it, for 12 years at the time of this recording, I've noticed considerable improvements in students I teach in their ability to memorize pieces of music once they understand the patterns that show up in that music. But the best part of that is when they get excited about their newfound superpower, and then they come in telling me all this other stuff they've memorized from other school subjects or from Googling things. But speaking of school subjects and academic studies, they may seem like they're worlds apart when you're in the classroom. But did you know that studying music for just 1 year can improve your math scores for life? Dr. Glenn Schellenberg from the University of Toronto, shouts out to Canada, took the popular belief that music lessons boost intelligence and through rigorous scientific research set out to prove it wrong. His initial thought was that this claim of music lessons boosting intelligence may have something to do with socioeconomic status, parental involvement, or even pre-existing cognitive abilities of the children who took music lessons. To ensure this wasn't the case, he gathered a sample size of 6-year-olds from various socioeconomic backgrounds and randomly assigned them to 4 groups: weekly piano lessons, weekly voice lessons, weekly group drama lessons, and no extracurricular activities. In his first study, they found significant increases in IQ scores for the piano and voice students compared to the drama and no lessons group. And these IQ improvements weren't limited to one area either. Math, reading, abstract thinking, marked improvements across the board. So, like any good scientist, he said, I don't know, and ran several studies with different populations and settings to see if he could replicate his findings, which he did. He also investigated the long-term effects of music lessons, finding all of the cognitive benefits remained throughout a child's life. And if that wasn't cool enough, Dr. Robert Butzlaff from Stanford University noticed in himself that after he picked up a musical instrument, I believe it was saxophone, he experienced an increase in the speed that he was reading and retaining written text. After conducting a strict meta-analysis with a large sample size of various age groups, educational settings, and types of music instruction, he found students who received music education consistently outperformed in reading comprehension tests and vocabulary. And much like Dr. Schellenberg's team, Dr. Butzlaff found these benefits persisted long after those initial music lessons as a kid. Now, earlier I mentioned Dr. Kraus's research on musicians performing better in distracting environments, and because of this ability to focus, musicians are better able to memorize and remember more information. In particular, her team tested sound and noise performance and was able to measure that musicians are able to perform in noisy environments better than non-musicians. That's not to say that the musicians like the noisy environment, it's just that if they need to, they can get things done. Dr. Silva Moreno from University of Toronto, shouts out to Canada, also studied how learning music sharpens auditory attention. His team wanted to see if music education would improve a child's ability to learn in a noisy environment as well, but they also wanted to test if it would improve a young musician's communication with their peers. Something I thought was interesting when reviewing the research in this study is they specifically looked at students between the ages of 4 and 6. Now check this out. They split these kids into 2 groups, a music group and a non-music group. The music group took music class for an hour a day that was evenly split between learning basic musical instruments, learning to sing simple songs, and practicing rhythmic exercise such as clapping to a beat. And this keeps getting more wild. They tested the kids just 20 days later. It hasn't even been 3 weeks. But it was because they wanted to show the immediate impact of music lessons. In the second test, children were tested on their ability to tell the difference between certain sounds, and in the third test, electrodes were placed on the children's scalps to measure brain activity in response to different sounds. This allowed Dr. Moreno to examine what activities in the brain related to auditory attention. And in all 3 tests, the children who studied music for a little under 3 weeks showed improvements compared to their peers who did not receive music lessons. The children who studied music were better able to focus on relevant sounds, ignore distractions, correctly identify and differentiate between sounds more effectively, and they showed faster and stronger brainwave responses to sounds. Let's take a moment to remember that these kids are between the ages of 4 and 6, and they took classes for 3 weeks. And the reason I'm so fired up about this one is, I know the benefits of this, but to have a scientist validate it, it's a nice way to start the day, you know? This next one, though, is probably my favorite study in the bunch. But first, if you think the stuff that you're seeing in this video is half as wild as I do, share it with a friend. There's no sponsor for these videos. I make them so that parents like yourself can decide if music lessons are right for you and your child. If you decide that they are, there's a link in my description where you can book directly into my calendar and see if we're a good fit to work together, if there are spots available. But with that out of the way, back to the video. I swear by the importance of teaching critical thinking. I believe it's a responsibility of every educator to help the students they work with learn to question the information that's presented to them and form their own opinion. Dr. Ruthsatz from Ohio State University believed that learning to play a musical instrument helped children develop flexible thinking and to approach problems from different angles. So she conducted a study that looked at children ages 6 to 12 who had been learning classical guitar, violin, or piano for at least 1 year. The control group in this study had no formal music training, but was involved in other extracurriculars such as sports or other art forms aside from music. Children in the study were then tested on their ability to generate multiple solutions to a problem, which is known as divergent thinking. They were tested on their performance on logic puzzles to test their analytical and deductive reasoning, and they were tested on real-world problem scenarios to see how they would solve things in practical situations. In the divergent thinking section, children who studied music came up with 30% more unique solutions. In the logic puzzles, the children solved the puzzles accurately, 25% faster, and in the real-world scenario tests, children who study music were assessed as 20% more creative in their solutions, 15% more practical, and 25% more thought out than their new non-musical peers. But taking a break from the academic studies for a moment, let's talk about an important life skill that develops in kids who study music: responsibility and discipline. The way I explain this to kids who start off with not practicing but want to get better is I hold up my guitar and I say, "You see, this does not care how old you are, how smart you are, or where you are from. It is simply a block of wood with some metal and plastic attached to it. The only way to get better at it is by doing more of the activity that you want to get better at, which is playing guitar." I recently did an entire video talking about creating practice routines that motivate students, and the techniques in that video can be used for creating other routines and habits. Link in the description. But what I'll say for the purposes of this video is when kids experience success from being responsible and being disciplined in one thing, they find it way easier and more fulfilling to create that in other areas of their life. Some of the stories I've heard from parents I've worked with include, one mom said at a dinner party where I met them while traveling to their country, "I don't know how you do it, Troy. I don't have to fight my kids to practice. I just tell them, 'Time for ukulele,' and they go play music for 15 or 20 minutes every time. It's great." Another parent, after her 3-year-old signed up for classes, sent me a video of the camera that was in their playroom, and it showed him sitting at his table. He'd chosen to pull out his music printouts on his own, and he'd been sitting there playing ukulele for a solid half hour. Make my day as a teacher, why don't you? And speaking of that willingness to pull out an instrument on their own, one of my favorite changes I've observed in students of any age learning classical guitar is the confidence that it builds. There's a certain level of challenge that happens with this style of music, but once they decide they're going to learn it. Recently, a couple of my students have circled back around to classical guitar, now that they're around about 9. And seeing the boost in confidence they've experienced from learning their first pieces has been amazing. One of them is quite shy and even performed unprompted in front of a guest because he was excited about the music he was playing. And jumping back into the research, Dr. Janet Mills from the University of London was intrigued by the idea that learning and performing a musical instrument would enhance a student's confidence and their self-esteem. Her study looked at students involved in various forms of school music programs and compared them against students involved in other extracurriculars, but not music. Their findings showed that students in music lessons experienced increased confidence, reduced performance anxiety, and enhanced self-esteem. And on top of that, Dr. Mills and her team found participating in music ensembles led to a stronger sense of belonging and teamwork, and they found strong correlations between music education and academic performance, which are claims supported by causal data that's earlier in the video by other researchers. Now, we've all probably thought to ourselves at some point that playing a musical instrument can improve coordination, and this next one's fascinating, but it's a little on the nerdy, more technical side, so bear with me. Dr. Gottfried Schlag from Harvard Medical School used various neuroimaging techniques in his studies to see if musical training led to structural and functional changes in the brain. And unlike the previous studies in this video, His musician category for the study was made up of professional musicians and advanced music students. They used magnetic resonance imaging, or MRIs, to measure the volume of gray and white matter in the various brain regions, diffusion tensor imaging, or DTIs, to examine the integrity and connectivity of the white matter tracts, and fMRIs, or functional MRIs, to assess brain activity and functional connectivity during musical and other cognitive tasks. In addition, Dr. Schlag conducted behavioral tests to evaluate motor skills, auditory processing, and spatial reasoning. And the findings are wild. His team found increased gray matter volume in musician brain regions associated with motor control, auditory processing, and spatial coordination, enhanced white matter tracts, particularly in the corpus callosum, which is that thing that connects two hemispheres of the brain together, facilitating better communication between the brain regions involved in those motor and auditory functions. And they were able to confirm these findings through musicians outperforming the non-musicians on the behavioral assessments, which included fine motor skills, auditory discrimination, and spatial reasoning. I find this study particularly cool, though, because not only does it have implications for lasting positive changes from sticking with music, it also has therapeutic applications for things like rehabilitating a stroke patient or for other people with brain injuries. Learning to play a musical instrument like the classical guitar is more than just acquiring a new skill. The research speaks volumes about how music education can enhance memory, boost math and reading skills, sharpen auditory attention, foster creative thinking, teach responsibility and discipline, build confidence, improve coordination, and even promote better mental and physical health. But this journey doesn't just stop at the academic and cognitive benefits. The joy that comes with mastering a piece, the thrill of performance, and the quiet confidence that comes from accomplishing something challenging are invaluable life lessons. If you're ready to get started, click the link in the description to get started with your first lesson for free today to see if we're a good fit, or share this video with someone you know to help spread the word about the benefits of music education. And to find out everything you need to know as a parent when signing up your child for music lessons, I've made a short playlist to guide you through it.